He walked in like a ghost. No name, no sound, no past. Just a man with torn shoes and a single coin in his hand. He dropped it in a donation box and disappeared. But when the security guard opened the box, he froze, because engraved on that coin was a family crest tied to one of Charleston's most powerful families, and the boy who once held it was supposed to be dead. But before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Charleston, South Carolina. The city hummed beneath a dull, low sky that threatened rain, but never quite followed through. The streets were slick from humidity, and the pavement shimmered like a mirror under the amber glow of the old gas lamps lining Broad Street. The breeze carried a thick, salty scent from the nearby marshes, tangled with the smell of brick dust and pine from an ongoing restoration project at the courthouse. Somewhere near the historic district, where centuries-old churches leaned slightly with time and iron fences wrapped like vines around faded estates, a small shelter sat tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a forgotten antiques shop. The kind of building that people passed every day but never really saw. Inside the shelter, fluorescent lights buzzed quietly, casting a pale glow over the linoleum floors. A man in a navy jacket sat in a wooden chair near the entrance. His name tag read Calvin Reeds, and he wasn't paid enough to care about much, but something about tonight made him unusually alert. It was a Tuesday, quiet, uneventful. That is, until 9:47 p.m. That's when he walked in, the man who would change everything. He didn't make a sound as he entered, but Calvin noticed him immediately, not because of any loud gesture, but because he carried himself with a strange, almost fragile dignity, like someone who used to be someone. He was wearing a frayed brown overcoat, 3 sizes too big, and a wool beanie pulled low over his brow. His shoes were mismatched, 1 boot, 1 sneaker, and they both looked like they had stories to tell. He smelled faintly of old wood smoke and rainwater, and in his hand he held something tight, closed inside a fist. Calvin leaned forward slightly, but didn't speak. The man walked slowly past the row of chairs, his head down. He stopped at the donation box near the back wall. An old metal cube bolted to the floor with a sign that read, "Give what you can, take what you need." People usually tossed in crumpled bills, loose change, sometimes a protein bar. But this man opened his hand, paused for a second, and placed a gold coin inside. The sound it made, a soft metallic clink, was strangely distinct, like it didn't belong. Calvin narrowed his eyes. Something about that sound gnawed at him. He waited until the man left, said nothing, then slowly rose from his chair and walked over. He looked down into the box and stopped breathing. The coin was unlike anything he'd ever seen, worn but heavy, gold clearly. On one side, the faint image of a lion's head surrounded by oak leaves. On the other, a family crest etched deep into the metal. Beneath it, a Latin phrase, Veritas vincit. Truth conquers. Calvin knew that crest. Not from a book, not from a museum. He knew it from a trial. A case buried so deep no one talked about it anymore. But he remembered. Whitmore. The name surged into his brain like a lightning bolt. He whispered it aloud. No way. Whitmore was one of Charleston's most prestigious names, wealthy, philanthropic, and decades ago involved in one of the city's darkest scandals. But the family vanished, or at least most of them did. And there were rumors that the youngest son had died in a fire, that the mother had fled the country, that the estate was sealed by court order. But most of all, Calvin remembered something no one else would. The coin. A detail buried in courtroom testimony, a child's possession, one of a kind. And now it was in his hand. He looked up, scanned the sidewalk, but the man had already vanished into the night. Back inside, the shelter had fallen quiet again. Calvin sat back down, the coin in his palm, and stared at the door. He didn't know who the man was. But he knew this: that coin didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to a Whitmore. And if that man was who Calvin feared he was, then this city was about to remember something it had worked very hard to forget. He slept under a bridge near the Ashley River, not because he liked the view, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because it was quiet, and the wind there had a certain way of reminding him he was alive. Thomas Whitmore didn't think of himself as homeless. He just didn't belong anywhere. He had no idea that the name Whitmore still meant something in Charleston. He hadn't spoken that name out loud in over 40 years. It was just a shadow now, buried beneath layers of forgotten winters, jobs that didn't last, faces he couldn't hold on to, and dreams he no longer trusted. Everyone just called him Tommy, or the Riverman, and that was fine with him. He kept his things in a canvas satchel worn smooth at the edges, a book with no cover, a half-broken harmonica, a pair of reading glasses, a folded newspaper from 1991, and inside a smaller pouch, zipped tight and wrapped in an old handkerchief, the coin. He didn't remember exactly when he'd found it, only that he'd had it since the day everything else disappeared. It wasn't just valuable, it was familiar, but in a way that hurt. He would sometimes take it out at night, hold it between his fingers, and whisper the Latin phrase like a prayer, Veritas vincit. But he never knew why it made him feel like crying. Thomas didn't speak much. He listened more. And when he did talk, his voice was calm, smooth, and oddly formal, like someone who'd once studied etiquette, but had forgotten when or why. Other men at the shelter respected him. Some found it strange that he could quote Emerson and Shakespeare, but didn't know how to apply for food stamps. Once, a volunteer offered him a job. Said he looked like he had a clean mind, even if the clothes told a different story. Tommy declined. He never explained why, but deep down he was afraid of stability, because every time things got too still, something from the past tried to surface. He didn't know it yet, but the past was already walking toward him. That morning, Charleston woke up under gray skies and a soft drizzle. Tommy walked 5 blocks to a small church where they served free coffee. He didn't go for the sermon. Just the silence. He sat in the back, head down, eyes closed, and for a moment he saw it again. The fire. It came in flashes. Heat, broken glass, someone screaming, his own hands clawing at the floor. Then darkness. Then silence. Then a hallway he didn't recognize. He opened his eyes. The cup of coffee had gone cold. Tommy never told anyone about the dreams, because he wasn't sure they were dreams. They might have been memories, or lies he told himself long ago, but something had changed lately. The dreams were getting sharper. Faces were returning. A tall man with a red ring, a woman crying in front of a mirror, a little girl with a green ribbon, and a golden lion on a door. He didn't know what it meant, but it terrified him. That night something in him snapped. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, he just couldn't carry the coin anymore. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was a sense of letting go, or maybe he just didn't want to die holding on to something he didn't understand. So he walked to the shelter on a broad street, waited until no one was watching, and placed it in the box. He never looked back. 3 blocks away, he found an alley behind a diner and curled up behind the trash bins. It smelled like grease and old onions, but it was dry. He pressed his hands together and tried to sleep. But the dreams came again. Only this time they spoke. A voice whispered, "You weren't supposed to survive." He woke up gasping. His fingers were trembling. And for the first time in decades, he whispered a name that didn't belong to the streets. Eleanor. Across the city, under the dim shelter lights, Calvin Reeds was holding the coin up to a flashlight, and his hands were shaking too. The next morning, Charleston woke beneath a sky made of soft fog and distant gull cries. Street lamps blinked off one by one, defeated by the daylight, and the pavement still held the memory of last night's rain. Calvin Reeds hadn't slept. He'd kept the coin in his hand the entire night, turning it over again and again, as if the weight alone could unlock some buried truth. But it wasn't just the coin that kept him awake. It was the name. Whitmore. That word hadn't passed through his thoughts in over 20 years, not since the case file was sealed, boxed up, and pushed into some forgotten corner of the courthouse archives. But now, the coin was real. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a rumor. It was in his hand. And that man who dropped it off, the ragged man with the strange stillness, he hadn't just wandered in. He'd come back. Calvin went to the Charleston Historical Society that morning, pretending to be a tourist. He asked to see old editions of the Post and Courier. He found what he was looking for within 10 minutes. April 6th, 1981. Headline: Tragedy at Ravenwood Estate. Fire destroys Whitmore family home. 3 photos accompanied the story. Flames tearing through a 3-story colonial mansion. A young woman, face hidden behind her hands, standing on the lawn. A boy, maybe 10, held in a police officer's arms, wrapped in a blanket. No visible injuries. The caption read, "Young Thomas Whitmore, presumed dead, seen being rescued before a structure collapsed." But that was the mystery. Thomas was never seen again. Police reports claimed he'd been taken to the hospital, but no admissions record existed. The child vanished between the ambulance and the ER. No body, no trace. The family said he didn't survive. The city believed it, but Calvin didn't. Not anymore. He stared at the grainy photograph of the boy's face. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open, forehead smudged with soot, and felt the bottom drop out of his gut. He recognized him. That man who walked into the shelter? That was the boy in the photo. Calvin wasn't a detective, not anymore. But instincts don't die easy. So he started asking questions. He returned to the shelter, checked the sign-in logs, no name. He spoke with the kitchen staff. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Dee, remembered him. "Called him Tommy," she said, flipping pancakes onto a tray. Polite. Never asked for more than what we gave. Kept to himself. Weird thing, though. What? He used to sit in the corner and sketch stuff. Always the same image. A lion inside a shield, real old-fashioned. Calvin's jaw tightened. "Do you still have any of them?" Dee nodded and pulled out a box of discarded papers. There it was, scrawled in charcoal on notebook paper. A lion's head inside an ornate crest, and below it, faintly, Veritas Vincit? That night, Calvin found a contact at the county records office and pulled the Whitmore family file. Much of it was redacted, but one section caught his attention. A deposition from a housekeeper filed 2 weeks after the fire. There were arguments. The senator came to visit twice. There was a man in the study I didn't recognize. The boy, Tommy, was always listening through the door. He saw something. It didn't say what, just that. He saw something. Elsewhere, Thomas sat by the riverbank, shoes off, feet in the cold water, eyes on the horizon. Something inside him had shifted. He could feel it, like a shadow brushing against a locked door in his chest. It wasn't just the dreams now. It was the feeling of being watched, and worse, recognized. He was walking through the city, and strangers were giving him second glances. A woman in a navy pantsuit looked straight at him that afternoon and visibly gasped. A man at the bus stop asked, "Did you ever live on Meeting Street? You look just like—" Thomas had walked away before he finished the sentence. That night, Thomas returned to the shelter, curious if the coin was still there. It wasn't. Neither was the donation box. In its place, there was a new one, different style, same sign. But the old box, the one he touched, the one that held his secret, was gone. So was the security guard. Thomas asked around. "Calvin? Haven't seen him today," which is weird. He never misses a shift. Meanwhile, in a cluttered apartment on the east end of the city, Calvin had pinned newspaper clippings, sketches, and family trees across his wall. He was spiraling, but something told him this was the last chance anyone had to find the truth. He opened a sealed envelope from the box of files. Inside was a photo, grainy and yellowed, 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing in front of a white piano. The boy was holding something in his hand. The coin. Calvin froze. The girl in the photo? He'd seen her before, not in real life, on a campaign billboard just outside the city. Eleanor Whitmore. Senator. Public servant. Reformer. Sister. He drove to her office the next day, asked to speak with her, was denied. Left a note. "I believe I found your brother. I need 5 minutes. Please." No answer. But when he returned to his car, there was a sticky note on the windshield. "Meet me tomorrow, midnight. Battery Park. Come alone." That night, Thomas had a new dream. He was back in the house, but this time he could smell smoke and hear footsteps. He turned a corner and saw himself, younger, hiding under a table. And through the doorway, a figure in a dark coat placing a document inside a fireplace. Then a whisper, "Burn it all." The boy saw. He woke up sweating, and for the first time in his adult life, he said the name again, out loud, Thomas Whitmore. And it didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt like a key. The moon above Battery Park hung low and pale, smeared slightly by a drifting fog. The trees leaned with the wind, and the iron benches sat cold and damp under the weight of the hour. Midnight came slowly. Calvin stood near the cannon monument, hands buried deep in the pockets of his jacket, the coin resting like a stone in his chest pocket. He heard her before he saw her. Heels on concrete, deliberate, unrushed. Senator Eleanor Whitmore emerged from the mist in a long gray coat. Her posture was upright, guarded. Her hair pulled into a sleek twist. She looked like someone used to being followed, but never caught. She didn't greet him. She just said, "Where did you get that coin?" Calvin pulled it from his coat and handed it to her. She didn't reach for it. She stared. And then she broke the silence. "I never thought I'd see that again." She told him it was custom-made for Thomas, her younger brother, on his 10th birthday. Their father had ordered it specially, embedding the Whitmore family crest and the Latin motto. It wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of legacy. But after the fire, she said, we were told his body had burned beyond identification. There were no remains. Calvin hesitated. "You believe that?" "I was 13, she said coldly. "I believed what they told me." He studied her. Her voice was controlled, too controlled. "But not anymore," Calvin said. "Not if you're here." A pause. Then she whispered, "I dreamed of him last night." Meanwhile, Thomas sat in the back of an abandoned bus near the rail yard, watching the rain tap against cracked windows. He hadn't slept since the night before. He couldn't. His memories were no longer random. They were connecting. The fire wasn't an accident. He remembered now, someone shouting behind the walls, a hidden door near the library, the smell of kerosene. He remembered hiding beneath the staircase, holding the coin tight. And he remembered hearing his name, not called out, whispered, like a warning. The next morning, Calvin brought Thomas's sketch to a retired detective named Miles Jarrow, who had worked the original Whitmore case. He found him tending tomatoes in his garden, still wearing his old CPD jacket. Jarrow studied the drawing for a long time. "You know what that is?" he asked. Calvin nodded. "Then you know what it means." Jarrow led him inside and pulled out a faded manila envelope. Inside were copies of files long buried. One name came up over and over: Senator Harlan Voss, a family friend, frequent visitor at Ravenwood, political ally of Eleanor's father, and under investigation for financial crimes at the time. The case had vanished after the fire. What if, Jarrow said, the fire wasn't meant to kill Thomas, but to erase something he saw? Calvin felt sick. And now he's resurfaced, which means whoever lit that match may still be watching. Elsewhere, Thomas sat at a payphone, his hand trembling as he dialed a number scribbled on the back of an old newspaper. It was a shelter outreach worker named Dana, one of the few people who ever gave him her full attention. When she answered, he only said, "I think I'm Thomas Whitmore." She didn't laugh. She didn't question him. She simply replied, "Then we need to find out who tried to make you forget." Over the next few days, Thomas, Calvin, and Dana met secretly in an empty wing of an old school slated for demolition. Dana brought a memory therapist, an older black woman named Lenora Glass, who specialized in recovering repressed childhood trauma. They spoke in long sessions, quiet and patient. At first, Thomas remembered images: a key on a ribbon, a woman screaming into a phone, a burnt photograph with Eleanor's face torn out. Then names: Voss, Lyon Hall, Winter Ledger. Lenora asked if Winter was a person. "No," Thomas said. "It's the name of a room." Calvin traced the name Lyon Hall and discovered it was the nickname for a restricted wing of the old Whitmore estate, now privately owned but still standing outside Charleston. The estate had been sold to a developer in the 90s and converted into an art retreat. The room named Winter was now used for storage, but something about that memory didn't feel stored. It felt sealed. Thomas insisted on going, so they went at sunset. The estate stood like a memory that refused to die. Red brick, black shutters, tall oaks bending over the drive like they wanted to shield the past from view. No one else was on the property. Dana had arranged temporary access using a friend at the city council. They entered through the side. The house creaked. Each step felt heavier. Then they reached the door, winter etched faintly into the molding above the frame. Thomas touched it and froze. The room smelled like dust and cedar. Inside, an old piano, covered furniture, stacked paintings, and a leather trunk. Thomas moved slowly. Then he pointed. "That rug. I remember that rug." They lifted it. There, beneath a loose floorboard, a locked box. They pried it open with a crowbar Calvin had brought. Inside, wrapped in cloth, a burned corner of a ledger, a photograph of Senator Voss and Thomas's father shaking hands, a cassette tape, no label. Just March 31st, 1981, written in faded ink. They left quickly. Back at Dana's apartment, they played the tape. The audio crackled. Then a voice. "If this gets out, it's not just our money, it's our kids, our bloodline. We bury this tonight. We bury the boy if we have to." Silence. Then, "The fire is set. Tell Eleanor she'll understand one day." The room went still. Thomas stared at the wall. Dana covered her mouth. Calvin said nothing, because he knew what Thomas had just realized. His sister knew. 2 days passed. Thomas didn't sleep. Not really. He wandered through the city, through the edges of memory. Every face looked unfamiliar and familiar at once. Every alley whispered the same thing. She knew. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Just unmoored. When someone builds your world for you, your identity, your story, your absence, and you realize they lied, you don't feel rage first. You feel nothing. The next morning, Calvin got a call. Blocked number. He answered anyway. A voice, female, tight. "Tell him I'll talk, but not here." "Eleanor?" he asked. Click. They met in St. Philip's Cemetery just before dusk. She stood near a stone angel, dressed in black. No security detail. "I didn't lie," she said before Calvin could speak. You knew the fire wasn't an accident, he said. She looked down. I didn't know he was alive. He didn't believe her, and she could tell. I was 13. My father told me Tommy was dead. I wasn't allowed to see the body. They said there was nothing left. Weeks later, I overheard something. What? She swallowed. That he'd seen something in my father's study, something that could ruin people. People like Voss. She didn't nod, didn't deny it. I told my mother, she said. She slapped me, told me we never speak of it again, and I didn't, for 30 years. Calvin handed her a copy of the audio tape. She didn't flinch. I've already heard it, she said. You were there? No, she said softly. But I remember the night it was recorded. That was the last time I saw my father cry. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to the shelter. He needed a place that didn't ask questions. He sat by the window and stared at a pigeon limping along the curb. Something about that bird felt like a mirror. He heard a voice behind him. You know they're looking for you, right? It was Dee, the cook. I'm not hiding, he said. She sat beside him. You remember more now? Yes. You remember what you saw that night? He looked at her, and for the first time said it out loud. I saw Voss hand my father an envelope, and my father put it in the fireplace, but not before he took something out. A list. A list of what? Names, he said. Children. Schools, donations, dates. That night Calvin and Dana met with Detective Jarrow. Jarrow had done some digging, deep off-the-books digging. He found out what the Whitmore Foundation really funded between 1978 and 1981. It wasn't just libraries. It was private adoption agencies, ones connected to foster case transfers in 3 states, and the dates matched the names on the list, including one name circled in red, Thomas E. Whitmore. Jarrow laid it out on the table. The foundation was laundering money for illegal adoptions. Voss was using it as leverage, and Tommy saw the original ledger before it was burned. Calvin leaned back, stunned. Dana looked at the floor, but Thomas, who'd entered halfway through, said nothing. He already knew. Flashback, a cold hallway, little Thomas crawling out from under the piano, papers scattered across the floor. And one sheet, just one, he stuffed into his coat before hiding again. He didn't remember doing it. But now it all made sense. The coin, the silence, the vanishing, they didn't just try to erase the crime, they tried to erase him. Later that night, Eleanor sent a message to Calvin. He deserves the truth. Meet me at Ravenwood, one last time. They returned to the estate. It was raining now, the kind of rain that doesn't fall. It clings. Eleanor led them through the side door, into the once-sealed study. She opened a drawer beneath a panel of the wall. Inside, a journal, her father's. She handed it to Thomas. He opened it. March 29, 1981. Thomas found the list. I saw it in his eyes. I told Voss we had to stall. Eleanor was too close to it. She adored him. If she suspects, it all falls. I cannot let my name, our name, go down in ruin. March 30th, 1981. There's talk of a fire. God forgive me. Thomas dropped the book. Eleanor stepped back, tears in her eyes. I didn't know they tried to kill you. I didn't know they made you vanish. You didn't ask, he said, and walked out into the rain. They didn't chase him, because he wasn't lost anymore. The next day, a federal investigation began. The audio tape, the journal, the names. It all became public. Voss vanished. The Whitmore Foundation shuttered its doors, and newspapers across the country ran the headline, Missing Heir Returns. Truth behind Charleston's most powerful family finally revealed. But Thomas refused to speak to them. He had nothing to sell, only something to bury. He returned to the river, sat in the same spot, held the coin, then dropped it into the water, watched it sink, and whispered, Veritas vincit. The rain didn't stop for days. Charleston moved on the way cities do, slow at first, then faster, then as if nothing had happened. But for those involved, nothing felt normal again, not for Thomas, not for Eleanor, not for Calvin, and certainly not for the Whitmore name. After the news broke, Thomas disappeared for 3 days. He left no trace. Calvin worried, searched hospitals, called shelters, even asked Dee. Nothing. Until the morning of the 4th day, when a note was slipped under Calvin's apartment door. In uneven handwriting, "Meet me where the world ended. Come alone." It was signed, T.W. Calvin found him at the Ravenwood ruins, what was left of the burned west wing. The fire had spared the stone chimney and the marble steps, but most had caved in long ago. Ivy grew over charred beams. Moss crept up the walls. Thomas sat in the rubble, staring at nothing. His eyes were distant but focused. "I wasn't supposed to come back here," he said quietly. "No one is," Calvin replied. Thomas ran a hand across the stone beside him. "I remember the sound of the fire. It wasn't loud. It was soft, like paper giving up." Calvin said nothing, just sat beside him. "Do you ever wonder," Thomas asked, "why some people survive things they shouldn't?" "All the time," Calvin said. Thomas showed him an old photograph, folded, water-stained, almost torn. It was of him and Eleanor. They were young, smiling, standing in front of the Whitmore estate's winter roses. He held it tightly. "She protected me," he said, "but not enough." Eleanor requested to meet him again, one last time. He agreed. They met at the river, no cameras, no staff, no press. She wore jeans and a cardigan, no makeup, no armor. Thomas leaned against the railing, said nothing. She approached slowly. "I wanted you to hate me," she said. "It would have made it easier." He shook his head. "I never hated you." A long pause. "I just needed you to be brave," he said. And her silence was an answer. They talked for hours, not about the crime, not about politics, just life. She asked if he remembered her hiding cookies under his bed. He did. He asked if she still had the white piano. She didn't. She sold it the year after the fire. "I couldn't hear it without seeing you crawl out from under it." Tears came quietly, then came laughter, then more silence, and before they parted she said, "If you ever want to be a brother again, I'd like to try." He looked at her and didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. Weeks passed. Investigations expanded. Voss was still missing. FBI task forces began uncovering more names, more children like Thomas, more hidden records. The scandal deepened, widened. But for Thomas, none of it mattered anymore. His story had already been told. His truth already surfaced, his pain already named. Now, he just needed peace. Dana helped him apply for a Social Security card under his real name. It was awkward, painful. A man returning to a world that had never prepared a place for him. She stood beside him at the clerk's office. "You want to put a middle name?" she asked. He thought for a second, then wrote, "Truth." Lenora, the therapist, offered him one final session. They sat in a quiet garden behind her home. "I want you to say it," she said. "Say what?" "Who you are." He exhaled, paused, then said, "My name is Thomas Whitmore. I was forgotten, I was erased, but I am here." She nodded. "And who are you now?" "I'm not a ghost," he said. "I'm not a scandal. I'm not just a victim." He paused. "I'm becoming." The day the foundation was officially dissolved, Eleanor sent Thomas a check, his legal inheritance. Nearly $2 million. He returned it. With a note. "You keep it. Use it for truth this time." 1 month later, Calvin found him working at a small bookstore downtown, rebuilding shelves, organizing old maps, drinking coffee. "You good?" Calvin asked. Thomas smiled. "For the first time, I think I might be." 1 year later, Charleston. Autumn came slow and golden, painting the streets with warm reds and soft shadows. The city still carried its secrets in the cracks of its bricks, in the corners of old churches, in the smell of salt and wood and thyme. But something had changed, not in the city, in him. Thomas Whitmore no longer hid beneath bridges or behind false names. He no longer whispered veritas vincit like a question. He had said it. He had lived it. And now he spoke it to others. Twice a week, he volunteered at a youth shelter, not the one with the donation box, but a new one across town, run by people who understood what it meant to be lost and not know it. He never told the kids who he was, only that he knew how silence could weigh more than pain, and that sometimes the smallest detail, a coin, a photograph, a name, could unlock everything. One morning he passed by the old shelter on Broad Street. It had been renovated, painted bright, the donation box replaced again, now modern, clear plastic, bolted to the wall. He paused. A child stood beside it, dirty shoes, hoodie zipped up tight, maybe 10 years old. He watched the boy take a small coin from his pocket and stare at it. Frozen. Then the boy dropped it in. The sound echoed. Clink. Thomas felt it in his ribs. He walked over slowly, kneeled beside the boy. "Looks like that one meant something to you," Thomas said gently. The boy looked up, shrugged. "My dad gave it to me, but I don't know. He's gone now. Thought maybe it could help someone." Thomas nodded. It already did. Later that night, Thomas sat by the river again. Same bench, same breeze, only this time he wasn't waiting. He was remembering. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small notebook, opened to the first page, and began to write. "Once I vanished, not because I ran, but because someone made the world forget I ever existed, and for a long time I helped them. But truth doesn't rot. It doesn't drown. It waits, it finds cracks, and it grows, until someone drops a coin, and the sound is loud enough to wake the past." Somewhere across town, Eleanor spoke at a new foundation opening. Its name, the Whitmore Trust, its mission, to protect truth, transparency, and children lost in the system. She never used the phrase reputation again. Only redemption. Calvin, now retired, kept the coin in a frame on his wall, not as a trophy, as a reminder that you never know who's walking into your life. And sometimes the most invisible person in the room is the most important story you'll ever hear. The press still looked for Voss. Some said he fled to Europe. Some said he died. Some said nothing. Thomas didn't care, because some ghosts only haunt people who never faced them. And Thomas had. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the water, Thomas closed his notebook, smiled to himself, and whispered one last time, "Truth conquers